Today, we're going to look past the candy wrapper and get right to the science. We're taking one of the world's most beloved foods, cocoa, and putting it under the microscope to see what decades, literally decades, of research can tell us about what it really does for our health.
You know, for most of our lives, we've kind of been told that chocolate is a guilty pleasure, right? An indulgence. But what's so fascinating is that a huge body of scientific evidence is starting to flip that whole idea on its head. It's asking a totally different question. Could the raw essence of chocolate, pure cocoa, actually be a powerful tool for our health? Well, the science is giving us some pretty surprising answers, so let's get into it.
So here's our game plan. We'll start with the absolute strongest evidence around heart health, then we'll see what it does for the brain. After that, we'll check out a few other potential benefits. I'll give you a practical guide you can actually use, and then we'll wrap up with a really crucial look at the risks and where the research is still headed.
Way before it was ever a candy bar, the Maya and the Aztecs, they revered cocoa. I mean, they used it in sacred rituals, they used it as medicine, they called it the food of the gods. And they were clearly on to something, but it's really only in the last few decades that our scientific tools have gotten sharp enough to understand the incredible biochemistry that was behind that ancient wisdom.
So what's the secret sauce? What's the source of cocoa's power? Well, it really comes down to this special group of compounds called flavonols. These are really potent plant-based antioxidants that interact with our biology in some truly amazing ways. So remember this word, flavonols, because it's the hero of our story today.
All right, let's start with the area where the scientific evidence is the most robust, the most compelling, and honestly, the most exciting. Cocoa's impact on our cardiovascular system.
One of the most important pieces of this whole puzzle comes from this really long-term study in the Netherlands called the Zutphen Elderly Study. Researchers meticulously tracked the diets and the health outcomes of 470 men for a full 15 years. You know, this kind of long-term data, it's just the gold standard for spotting real patterns in human health.
And the result was stunning. After they adjusted for all the other lifestyle factors, the men who consumed the most cocoa had a 50% lower risk of dying from cardiovascular disease. Just let that sink in for a second. A 50% reduction. That's a massive effect that you almost never see in nutrition science. It demanded an explanation.
So how on earth could cocoa have such a dramatic effect? Well, the mechanism isn't magic. It's pure biochemistry, and it all begins deep inside our 60,000 miles of blood vessels with a tiny molecule that basically governs their health and their flexibility. Remember those flavonols we just talked about? Well, they stimulate the delicate lining of our arteries, it's called the endothelium, to produce more nitric oxide. Nitric oxide, or NO, is a powerful vasodilator. You can think of it as a biological signal that just tells your blood vessels to chill out, to relax and widen, and that allows blood to flow more easily, and it lowers pressure across your entire system. And we can actually measure this effect in real time. This chart you're seeing summarizes the results of 19 different clinical trials looking at something called flow-mediated dilation, or FMD. And you can think of FMD as a stress test for your arteries. It measures just how flexible and responsive they are. The data consistently, trial after trial, shows that cocoa leads to about a 2% improvement, which is a clinically significant boost in vascular function.
And look, this isn't just a theory. It's documented in the Journal of the American Medical Association, one of the top medical journals in the world. This quote from a randomized controlled trial connects all the dots. Small amounts of the right kind of chocolate reduce blood pressure, specifically by improving the body's production of that crucial nitric oxide. And here are the actual numbers from that exact trial. The group eating just 6.3 grams of dark chocolate a day saw their systolic blood pressure drop by nearly 3 points and their diastolic by almost 2 points. But here's the real clincher. The group eating white chocolate, which has 0 cocoa flavonols, saw no change at all. This is basically the smoking gun that proves the effect is coming directly from the cocoa.
Okay, so the heart benefits are clearly strong. So what about the brain? Let's move up from the heart and see what the science has to say. Now, here the story gets a little more complex, and it's really important that we separate the different claims that are out there. And right away, we find a really crucial distinction in the research. When scientists look at systematic reviews, which are basically summaries of all the best studies, they don't find consistent proof that cocoa makes you measurably smarter or better at memory tests. However, the evidence for its effect on your mood is much more promising. Multiple studies have linked it to improved feelings of calmness and contentment.
In fact, look at this striking statistic from a massive survey of over 13,000 adults. People who reported eating dark chocolate had 70% lower odds of also reporting depressive symptoms. Now, it is absolutely vital to remember, this is an association, not causation. It could just be that people who feel better are more likely to reach for dark chocolate. But still, it's a really powerful correlation that points toward a potential mood-boosting effect that researchers are now investigating very, very seriously.
Okay, now let's explore some of the other intriguing areas of cocoa research. These are effects that are a bit less established than the cardiovascular benefits, but they show some really interesting potential.
So you might have heard this claim that cocoa can act like some kind of internal sunscreen. Well, researchers put this to the test. They measured what's called the minimal erythema dose, which is basically just a fancy scientific way of saying how much UV light it takes to give someone a sunburn. And despite the theory, the trial found that high flavanol chocolate did not provide a significant protective effect.
But, and this is where it gets nuanced, while it didn't stop a sunburn, that very same study found a small but significant improvement in skin elasticity, specifically on the temple, a sun-exposed area. This kind of suggests that while it is not a substitute for sunscreen, cocoa flavanols might be helping the underlying structure and resilience of the skin. And what's really fascinating is that this benefit was still there, even after people stopped eating the chocolate for 3 weeks.
And what about weight loss? A few years back, a study made huge headlines. It reported that people on a low-carb diet who also ate dark chocolate lost weight faster than the diet-only group. It was hailed as this miracle weight loss accelerator. But, as always, we have to look a little closer at the science.
And here it is, the absolutely critical caveat. The chocolate group in that study consisted of only 5 people. 5. A study with such a tiny sample size is super susceptible to just random chance, and you absolutely cannot use it to draw any firm conclusions. This is a perfect example of why we have to always check the quality of the evidence before we believe a media headline.
Okay, so we've reviewed the science, the good, the promising, and the overhyped. So let's get practical. How do you take all of this and turn it into a smart choice when you're at the grocery store? The single most important number on a bar of chocolate is the percentage. This tells you how much of that bar is made from the actual cocoa solids, which is where the flavanols live, versus other stuff like sugar and milk fat. A higher percentage is always your best bet for maximizing the health benefits and minimizing the junk. Let's break it down into 3 simple steps. First, aim high. 70% cocoa or higher is really where the benefits start to show up in the studies, and pure unsweetened cocoa powder is a fantastic option too. Second, you don't need a lot. That major blood pressure study used just over 6 grams a day. That's like 1 small square, not the whole bar. And third, just remember that processing can destroy these delicate flavanols, so generally, the less processed, the better. Now, before we get too carried away, it's so important to have a reality check. Cocoa is not a miracle food, and there are potential risks and some big unanswered questions that we absolutely need to talk about.
So here are the 3 main concerns. First, the cocoa plant is very good at absorbing heavy metals like cadmium and lead from the soil, and those can accumulate in the final product. Second, cocoa naturally contains stimulants like caffeine and its cousin theobromine, which could be an issue for some people, especially later in the day. And finally, and probably most obviously, most chocolate products are just calorie-dense and loaded with sugar, which can easily outweigh any of the benefits if you're not careful.
But this next finding, it hints at a huge, unanswered question. To look at long-term effects like lifespan, scientists often use simpler organisms, like the C. elegans worm. In one really fascinating study, researchers found that cocoa only extended the worm's lifespan if they got it from the very beginning of their lives. When it was given to adult worms, it had no effect. This raises a wild question. Could the timing of our cocoa consumption matter for us humans too? Right now, we just don't know.
So after going through all this science, if there is one single message to take away with you today, it is this. When it comes to cocoa for health, it is all about quality over quantity.
All right, so let's wrap it all up with a quick cheat sheet. The evidence for heart health? It's top-notch. For your mind, it seems to help mood more than raw brain power. In the store, always choose high-percentage cocoa products. At home, a small daily dose is all it takes. And always, be mindful of calories, sugar, and potential contaminants.
So, it turns out the ancient food of the gods really does have compounds that powerfully interact with our biology. The science is pretty clear on some of the benefits, and it's just getting started on others. It really leaves you wondering, What other powerful secrets are just hiding in the foods we eat every single day?